Talk about trading mechanisms, and these are the structures that are in place that define how stocks and bonds and other securities are traded. And so let's just recall liquidity very quickly. Remember, there's two different meanings of the word liquidity. The first is corporate liquidity, and this is the ability of a corporation to borrow again to pay off last week's debt, to borrow again from a bank or through the money markets or some other way. And the 2008 liquidity crisis refers to corporate liquidity, and remember the TED spread spiking was an indication of a lack of corporate liquidity. But what we're concerned about now is asset liquidity. And this is the second definition, and there's two dimensions to asset liquidity. The first is how long we have to wait to get full price, and the second is the size of a price drop necessary to get immediate cash. And again, we're concerned about asset liquidity. And we want to think about this in the context of how liquid is a used car. How do I sell a used car? Well, I'm going to post an ad on the internet, and I'm going to wait for someone to come to my house, and I'm going to have to wait some period of time for someone to come by to give me full price. Or I'm going to have to drive down to Federal and see Deal and Doug, and Deal and Doug is going to give me cash right away. But in which case, I'm going to have to take a pretty significant price hit relative to what I would have gotten in theory if I had put an ad on the internet and waited for somebody to show. And we'll talk about why Doug gets paid, Deal and Doug, the used car dealer, gets paid in a minute. How liquid is a house? Well, I put a house on the market and I wait a while until someone wants to buy it. 100 shares of Apple. That I can trade pretty much right away at a price extremely close to the most recent price. And so 100 shares of Apple is going to be pretty liquid. 10,000 shares of Apple, well, that's going to take a little bit longer. And I might have to wait again for buyers to show to give me full price. But if I want to sell right away, then I might take a big price hit. And we're going to talk about the mechanism of how that might happen in a minute. And so the point is to think about how these assets are bought and sold. What are the different mechanisms for selling a car with a dealer, a house through a broker, 100 shares of Apple versus 10,000 shares of Apple? These are going to be fairly illustrative. And so here are our market types. And again, this is not every single kind of market type. It's just a good indication. And so we'll start with this first one, which is a direct search, like a bulletin board or Craigslist. And I just post that I want to sell something and other people find it. Maybe they post that they want to buy something, but this is a direct search where the buyer and seller meet through some sort of market, in this case, electronic. The next is going to be, and you tend to have fairly wide variety of goods. They're not, and the word is fungible. What does fungible mean? Fungible means they're all the same, meaning that gold is gold, wheat is wheat. I don't care which shares of Apple I get. Houses aren't really fungible. And so in a direct search market, we tend not to see fungible assets sold. We tend to see assets that people need to sort of evaluate. A broker is, by definition, someone who matches up a buyer and a seller and takes a commission for doing so. They never actually take physical or legal ownership of the asset. So you have a real estate broker, they never actually buy the house from you. They just find someone to whom you can sell the house. A dealer is different than a broker in that a dealer actually does take possession of the asset. The dealer buys the asset from you and then waits for a seller to come. And a dealer is different from a broker in that a dealer actually has to have capital. The dealer actually has to have money available to buy the asset from you, and then has to actually hold that asset for some period of time until they can then sell that asset. The last sort of major market type that we'll talk about is something called a continuous auction or order-driven. Sometimes these are referred to as electronic communication networks. What we'll do now is define security characteristics, talk about how these markets work, and see which types of securities seem to fit best and which types of assets seem to fit best in these different market types.